I don't know how frequently you listen to the show, but I try to start it off with some vocal practices before we get rolling. Unique New York, unique New York. How now, brown cow? The Human Torch acquired a bank loan today. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. And then we got the unicyclist purchased a pair of pants. I think that was what it was. And then our friend Jacob gave us the pickled porcupine popped peppered popcorn, something like that. I still have to rewatch that episode. I'm gonna say that it's gonna be a broken record. Do you have any vocal practices that you like to do just in your free time?
No, I don't have any. Sorry.
I don't think most people do, so I always ask just in case. It's the S's and the P's. That's what makes it pretty difficult. So let me get myself situated here with the Twitch machine. Make sure everything's all systems go. I might play some Handball 21 here in a couple days. So we'll talk about that maybe later in a little bit here. We're all fired up, so let's get rolling. Welcome back, shooters, for a fantastic Team Handball Tuesday edition of Shootin' Straight, the Handball podcast with JD and, just JD. Joey is incapacitated, but we have him in spirit beneath my face. But sitting in Joey's normal spot is Neil Johnson. Neil, how are you doing this evening?
Doing great. How's it going?
It's typical Tuesday. So, for those of you that are unaware of you and what you do, would you mind giving a brief bio synopsis of what your daily work life
Sure.
looks like?
So I'm a sports analytics developer at ESPN. Basically, I'm a programmer on our sports analytics team. The sports analytics team at ESPN does all sorts of projections for all sorts of sports. I guess what I always tell people is the easiest way to understand what we do is if you look at the bottom line and you see like a % chance to win number in football or basketball, that usually that came from a model of ours. So we do stuff like that. We do all sorts of other cool stuff as well. But that's the work. And then I'm from Columbus, Ohio. That's where I'm at now. And I'm an Ohio State grad. So that's where I saw everything you were doing with Ohio State's team handball team. And that's how we hooked up.
Yeah. For those of you who are unaware, Neil actually came to one of our games last season to help out as we start to try to tackle some bigger intake of stats during the game, and he saw the chaos that goes into a standard American handball match. But unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to cut things short here. So we're still looking to stay involved, and one of the things that Neil and I have been talking about the last few weeks is the capability of utilizing some stats to help with the national team program. So we're going to maybe do a deep dive next couple weeks on how we can help Team USA from a numbers standpoint try to get a win in their difficult group stage. So that's something to look forward to. So Neil, why don't you talk a little bit? Oh, Mishi wants to say Mishi's our top shooter. She would like to give a shout out to a fellow software geek. So we're always good to have everybody on the same team here. But let's talk a little bit about where handball and some of your analytics background can kind of merge into one beautiful creation here, because I think there's a lot of pathways that we could go
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's where, so at ESPN, we do pretty much every sport. We do any sport we broadcast and some of the other ones as well. So that's where I come from. I'm very passionate about basketball. I do a lot of the basketball work on my team, but that's where we as a team work together to produce all the stuff we do across every sport. So that's where working at ESPN has kind of allowed me to kind of see trends that happen when applying analytics to more than one sport, more than just basketball, more than just baseball. So that's where I'm also obviously a fan of handball. And there's really not anything going on with respect to like even basic stat keeping, let alone applying analytics to it. So that's where I just see that there's a bunch of edges to be gained, especially for a team that is looking for all the edges they can get in Team USA for sure. So yeah, that's
so.
where like the whole stats infrastructure kind of needs a little bit of an overhaul. I mean, part of that's probably a little bit my ignorance, but just googling around for team handball stats, it's not plenty. There's not a sports reference site for it, stuff like that. So yeah, that's where like doing better stats keeping to start, and then starting to play analytics on top of that. I just know there's going to be a lot of edges to gain. There's all sorts of different angles you can go with it. The one that I think that could probably work right away is just in-game strategy. There's other sports. There's in-game strategy like revolutions, I guess, in other sports that I think could definitely apply to handball. Like the fact that there's not a shot clock. We should do everything we can to force the sport to have a shot clock, because that's kind of crazy to me. But there's just stuff like that. The way that fouls are kept, the way the clock's kept. So there's certainly stuff there you can do in the in-game strategy level. And then there's also the level of player development and like internal team development. So that could be like, okay, what parts of your game are good, what parts of your games are bad. Obviously, you can do that with film, but having the numbers-based approach can help kind of make your understanding of more. You can understand more players at a level as you almost would with watching film, right? So, like for Team USA, trying to understand who would be good for the national team, who would be good for the junior teams. If you had the stats for all of the prospective athletes, that could be your first tier approach to be like, okay, who all hits certain qualifiers and certain numbers? Then we're going to go look at their film and make the decision. So you can do that on the player level. You can do that on the team level to understand scouting your opponents, scouting yourself, understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, and vice versa for the opponent. So that's where, yeah, like I was just starting to look at doing stuff for Team USA for the World Championship, trying to get some better context around what to expect for the games and for the opponents they're going to play in the group stage. And that's where like being able to quantify like, okay, we have an X% chance to win against Austria versus France and Norway. That might really help with respect to like how much should you focus on trying to get that win against Austria versus trying to pull like a major upset against Norway or France.
Yep. Yeah, I think I'm surprised nobody had any comments about the shot clock, because that's usually a pretty touchy subject.
Is it?
Handball circles, yeah. There's
I'm kind of out of handball circles, by the way. So if people want to put me in place in any way, please do. I certainly love watching it as much as I can. But like I said, I'm really into basketball, and I have other responsibilities as well. So I don't get to watch it as much as I would like to. And obviously, like I wish my company would broadcast it more than they would, and it'd be more accessible in the U.S. in general. So that's also another barrier.
Do you have any insight on how we may be able to tap into ESPN's market? I know John Ryan has, pitched to them having its own handball button on the ESPN Plus platform and things like that. And I don't know the first thing about how we go about that. So
I kind of don't either. I'm definitely very much on the bottom of the totem pole here at ESPN. So that's definitely above my pay grade. But what I can say is, having working just even at ESPN for 4 years, it's kind of made me understand sports media and understand the media's landscape a little bit more, and understanding what are all the players out there, what are all the different avenues and everything. And that's something that I've discussed with you is, especially in the United States handball, there's not a pro league here. The majority of the action, the best action is on the club level. And a lot of those clubs are affiliated with colleges. So that's where I would say probably the first step to do would be like, Big Ten has a Big Ten network, ACC has the ACC network. They do a lot of student generated broadcasts where, it's resume experience for people looking to be commentators, people being in front of the camera, people being behind the camera. And they might be looking for more sports to to produce. They might be looking for sports that give them more flexibility as to when and where they can do it and how they can do their broadcasts. So that would be my first suggestion, is for like Ohio State's handball club, for instance. I would be trying to talk to the Big Ten Network and seeing if you can do a student U broadcast of any kind. They throw them on their linear channels. They throw them on BTN2 Go. So I think it's probably just a matter of, getting the right people interested.
That's what frustrates me so much, is we have kids on our team that have been in a sports marketing and sports management background, that they've worked directly for the athletic department. They've worked for Big Ten Network, and yet we can't seem to get the right people having the right conversations. So we'll get there, and I will definitely persist on that front. So any of these UNC and Virginia guys, if you're listening, make sure you tap into the ACC network down there.
Another thing you can do is, you have this Twitch channel where you're doing the podcast on. You could probably try to do as many event broadcasts from this channel as well. So and then kind of at least try to get the numbers up on this channel.
Right. And we're at the point now where we are affiliate level, so we can get subscribers and start bringing in some money. But we attempted to do like a live broadcast of Columbus Armada versus the Dublin Drunks a few weeks ago. That was a bit of a fiasco. I couldn't figure out why my Twitch was not working with my camera. I didn't allow Twitch access to my camera, so that was a big ordeal. And then had to get a mobile hotspot for somebody's iPad, and you know how it goes. We ended up making it work after we lost power at one of the facilities, so we had to travel to the other part of the park to get lights. But we finished the game over there on a short cord. And anyways, so yes, I agree that Twitch is definitely an avenue worth pursuing, and one that I find shocking that more people have not tapped into. And I think it creates a easy platform that people can watch and comment and share, and even make clips. That's the big thing that I try to tell people with Twitch, is that we can go back and make clips. You're watching it in game and you see something you like, you just clip it, and then that's saved forever, and you can go back and access that accordingly. So it'll help build your highlight tape right there. So that's something for the future I want to try to figure out for our upcoming games, whenever those are allowed to take place again.
Another thing you could try is just doing tape delay broadcasts. Obviously, you like to do everything live, right? But if you're running into issues at the venue in the moment, maybe it's better to just do the record video on the iPad, and then that's where you can go home and you could kind of touch it up a little bit, have your own score bug or whatever, and then like you could have the players, like you could time the premiere of it to have it to when people who played could actually watch it if they're interested in watching it. They could even do live commentary or whatnot. So if you ever run into like big issues with that, like what you just kind of explained, might be worth trying to do that sometimes.
Good to think about. So back with the stats and analytics side, we talked about utilizing, trying to make the most out of lack of a shot clock and things like that. What other areas within handball do you see as a potentially monumental shift in how the game is played?
I'll caution monumental, but I'll definitely throw some ideas out there that might be worth running down. The first one for me is, I guess I'll just go off the shot clock. I mean, that's where obviously you have to make like a continuous effort towards shooting on the goal to some degree, but you can obviously manipulate that to various levels. So for instance, if you're like an underdog, that's where you could use that to minimize the amount of shots attempted for both teams by taking more time on your shots attempted. Something that happens in any sport is, if you have a very lopsided matchup, you're the underdog, you want to minimize the amount of scoring chances to increase variance in the game outcome. Like if you think about it in the extreme case, if both teams just had one shot on goal, how often would you be winning that versus having 50 shots on goal or whatever, right? So being closer towards 1 on that scale is better than being closer towards like whatever the max is. So that's the first one I think of, is just like looking at ways to like, I'm not saying you need to go from a 30-second possession to a minute 30-second possession every time. That would obviously get people in trouble pretty fast, but could you like make it so that your average possession is 45 seconds or 50 seconds, and then that over the course of a whole game might really add up.
Right. That's good. That's a good tactic. So Martin said in the chat, the problem for the shot clock is the unlimited amount of fouls a team can commit.
Yeah, so that's definitely another one, and then that's something you could do on defense. Like if you're playing against a really good team, you could continue to foul a lot. I mean, you could do that also to varying levels with respect to like you obviously don't want to get your important guys in trouble and get them potentially kicked out of the game or whatever, depending on the severity of the foul. But outside of that, like that's where it's like, if you really wanted to be the annoying team that's trying to do everything they can to win, like these are things that are very exploitable. And that's something that, like, that's just so representative of this sport not being very focused on when it comes to like quantitative analysis, because these are things that get fixed real fast in a lot of other sports by implementing a shot clock, implementing a foul count so people can foul out, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think, Mishi said, we already struggle with timekeepers and secretaries not keeping up with the game. Imagine they would need to manage a shot clock now. Oh boy, that's a good point. That's a good point. So,
well, you could have a ref control the shot clock. Some sports, in some situations, have it that way. But yeah, I mean that's where. So like I'm in the basketball. Like I said, with United States high school basketball, there's a big issue because not every high school or not every state in the U.S. has shot clocks. So it's state by state. So that's where in some of these states, like Ohio is definitely one where if you watch like the state championship games, if a team gets up by like 15 or something, they're just like dribbling out the ball near half court on offense, and they're forcing the other team to foul them, put them on the line just so they can get a chance on offense and then run the press. So it's just one of those things where, like, I guess in general, the influx of data, technology, communication across the board in our lives in all sorts of ways in the last 20 years has allowed people to just get as competitive as they possibly can in everything. And that obviously, sports is obviously no exception to that. So that's where this type of stuff infiltrates every sport. It's just a matter of when, not if. So that's where, we've been talking about handball, and I'm like, there's definitely certain things here that could be done. And they would probably be done to the point, at some point, they would be done to such an extreme that, they probably want to change the rules some to mitigate it.
So, things to think about when a pro league ever gets launched here in the U.S. Maybe a slight change of the rules. I know one area that I often think about is how we can shift, players on the court. Maybe, you and I have talked about the wing situation, and it's one of those areas where, you start a team, you always put the kid that doesn't know what he's doing or can't catch the ball, you put him at right wing, and he'll never touch the ball, and he's just there to spread the defense. Well, what if we could put him someplace that he actually could be utilized and actually make a scoring attempt? Because a right-handed player from right wing that's never played the game is just not going to score. They're not going to get back on defense fast enough. Then they're going to hate playing the game. So how can we maybe find a way to improve that?
Yeah, so that's where, like in basketball, with its 3-point line, having guys in the corners, you have a shorter 3-point attempt in the NBA than you would from the top of the key or in the center of the court. That's where it's useful to have a guy in the corner. But in handball, there's no 3-point line. The angle to score a goal in the corner in handball is worse than it is in basketball. Because of the nature of the goal and the goalkeeper. So yeah, that's where, like, we were talking about this before, and I'm like, I don't really see a point to have a guy in the wing both wings, other than to keep the defense a little honest. But that's where I would be interested to see how honest the defense would keep itself. Like, how far can you push that? One thing I would certainly consider is, like, obviously the easiest way to score a goal is to be in front and center of the goal with no one in front of you. Obviously, that's not always going to happen, but that's where my mind just goes, is like, how could you get more guys up in front and center of the goal? Like, could you have more than one pivot? Because that's where if you have more, like, if you can pass it to the pivot pretty cleanly, he's going to get a really good look. That's a really good shot. So what would be the way to increase you getting shots like that? It would be having other guys doing similar things, other guys in similar spots. The other part of it for having guys in the wings that's a downside is when you're changing sides of the court. Those guys have to run like another, 5 to 10 feet, 5 to 10 meters, whatever you want to call it, to get back on defense. So that is another way, like, that's another thing that hurts them. It just increases the chance of the other team getting a fast break or getting an ideal shot scenario that you don't want them to have. Like, honestly, having a guy, like, it would probably be better to have a guy, instead of having one guy in one of the corners, just having him at center court and having him rotate the ball. Like, sadly, that's probably more effective. That might sound a little crazy, but, like, what is the scoring effectiveness of a guy in the corner versus a guy at half court? They're probably not that much different. And then having a guy at half court probably completely prevents a fast break from happening. It at least allows you to slow down one guy streaking and at least make it a contested shot to some degree. So, like, in aggregate, over the course of a game, that's probably a slightly better move, but no one's doing that right now. Right. And that's where, like, I don't have the data to necessarily back that up right now, but that's where I guess I've done, like, a lot of work with basketball and with their player tracking data and understanding the importance of space on the court.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we need to continue to look into. And Martin said that's why lefties are so important in handball, is because they offer you actually ability to use, that side of the court or even that wing. So good points. Good points. I know one of the most touching, controversial topics is obviously 7v6 with pulling the goalie, and when that is and is not effective to do. So and I think you and I talked about how
I think it's dumb.
Okay, you and I are on the same page. I think trying to get all the other coaches on. I know, I think it was, what was it? It was Croatia and Brazil, I think, is the infamous game where Croatia was running the 7v6 and they were not scoring, and Brazil was capitalizing on it to the point where I think Brazil, I don't know if they ended up winning the game or got very close to winning a huge upset win for them. I think they did win. But one of those things where it's just, if you just don't pull the goal, you didn't need to go the extra man up and give yourself an empty net to have to defend. So that's another one where I think there's enough evidence from games that we can show the positive and negative attributes with that one pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I was watching what was it, USA and the Pan American Games last year. It feels like forever ago.
Yeah.
But they were doing a pretty aggressive amount of goal pulling there, and that's where, like, just as a fan, I guess, with a little bit of a quantitative mind, I guess, but I was just, like, noticing all of the pretty much open net goals they were giving up to just put themselves in the position to be an ineffective 7-on-6 situation. And I was like, I just can't imagine that that's worth it. That's like, going back to what I just said before this, it's like, I would rather you pull one of the wings, have them in that goalie. Honestly, that would be what I would do immediately. Like, I just don't understand what I'm losing there. And that's where with the 7-on-6, like, do you know of a situation on the 7-on-6 where they execute that really well, where they bring the goalie back onto the court really well? I guess, like, the only times that would really happen is when you're scoring a lot, right?
So the intent with 7-on-6 usually is you're going to have a 2 pivot setup, and you're going to start the play from the side of the court that you have your bench on. So let's say your bench is on the left side of the court. You're going to have the left wing start the play, which is typically just going to be either an overload or it'll start a simple cross or something like that. But they will start the play and then immediately run out so that they're running out of bounds to get the goalie back on the court while the rest of the play is happening. So it's only offers really a couple seconds of a man advantage, and I don't know that the defense has shifted enough for it to be a huge enough impact.
Yeah, and then that's where you that's where your team's more, there's a propensity there to then shoot it no matter how bad or suboptimal the situation is. Whereas in other formations, you could opt out up to a certain point. You could be like, nah, like I thought I was going to be able to jump here and get an open look, and that wasn't true. So I, at least throw it back to somebody.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'll say this. I respect the thinking. I respect trying to do something different. That's the type of thinking you need to have to find things that are worth doing. So that's where if I was talking to a coach about it and trying to tell them it's not really worth it, I would say I'm glad that you're.
We may have lost Neil. Oh, there's movement. Can't hear him. As you guys know, my internet spotty as usual. It's just all right. Neil's back. Sorry. Dang internet. I don't know if OBS doesn't like trying to stream, maybe and Zoom. For the future, we'll have Neil in the studio, non-COVID times. We'll just have him in the studio down here, my very robust studio I have in the basement here. Anyways, sorry. Before you got cut off by the lack of internet capabilities, you were saying you'd just tell the coach you respect his idea and thoughts, but.
Yeah, just I respect you willing to try something that's a little bit out of the box, but there are definitely other out of the box ideas that are way better and way worth doing, and this is not one.
That's the one I really struggle with our team, that we, for whatever reason, like to run it pretty frequently, and I don't really know why. I don't know if it's just for fun or what, but it drives me nuts. So. One of the questions that came up in the chat was, as I try to recover the chat, what stats are available for European handball? And as you and I have looked into, they have a lot of stats on, shot placement, both on the goal and where they shot from on the court, what phase of the attack, as well as like where the goalie made their saves and things like that. The Champions League matches, and I think at the European Championships they had several players that would do player tracking, so they would track fastest sprint, longest distance ran during a game, highest jump, shot, fastest shot, things like that. So I think that was only a couple of the players, but I don't know I think they were wearing special shirts that helped track that. I don't know.
Yeah, they probably had sensors that. Okay. So I know a lot about player tracking stuff. That's definitely what I do at ESPN. There's definitely a lot of companies out there, so I'm not aware of the ones that are doing for handball. But that's where, you basically just have like a sensor chip in the jersey. It's like a little GPS thing that measures your speed and location, acceleration, stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah, like having that like shot location stuff, like the XY coordinate of where the shot was attempted on the court, and also on the goal, like what section of the goal it was aimed at. It's definitely not. That stuff can be a little imperfect because usually it's like a human making the decision, so there's like a chance for them to have not the best interpretation for it or whatever. But that's definitely a great start. And like I've said to you, that's something I'm really going to be interested in looking at and trying to see what type of nuggets we can get out of that, what type of information we can get out of that. I think that's where, like, obviously we know shots in the center of the court right on the line are most optimal. We know corner shots aren't as optimal, but if we have some hard numbers to explain how much better one is to the other, that might be really telling. It might be so telling that like you should never attempt corner shots ever. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's, people who shoot corner shots are actually a little bit better than we expect for certain reasons. So I don't know. That's where having a database approach can kind of tell you things that you might not be able to see with your eyes. And then like the other part of that is like watching film. Like I say this a lot to coaches in general, regardless of sport, is like you're obviously an expert in the sport. Your knowledge on it is unparalleled. I'm not going to be able to create some algorithm that's going to usurp you of that by any means. But you're not able to watch thousands of games and produce insights on all of them. Like eventually you're going to get tired and just start having poor insight on them, right? So that's where a computer can help. That's where a computer we can get okay insights off of a much wider data set and then use that to tell us things that we just don't have the physical time to do or the energy.
Yeah, that's very true. I know that's one where I look at the daunting task of just collecting all the data, and shout out Brian Cawthorn, who's done that as much as he can with the American system, and it's a daunting task. So he's built up. I mean, he's acquired all the game sheets from every game that's been played in America, and that's how he. I don't know if you've checked out, Neil.
No, I need to know about this.
Okay, I'll send you a link to it. It has all the American games on it, but it's on the Northeast Team Handball League website. That's run by Brian.
I think I might have checked that out a while back, but.
Yeah, he
still send me the link.
He does a good job with it. It's tough, obviously, especially in America, because you got a lot of factors that come into play. That, for instance, like, well, the game wasn't 60 minutes. The game wasn't on a full length court. This is
very grassroots-esque.
Right. And the hardest part for me is that we do rankings, and how am I supposed to rank a team that I know their best player didn't play in this tournament, and so as a result they lost.
That's always tough.
And so I can't rationally say that this team's better than that team, knowing that player didn't play, especially at the collegiate level, because that's where you would like to think more consistency with players comes about. But it's tough because I see my team play, I don't always see the other teams play, and there's no video to watch to get a proper understanding. So nobody really has a good gauge on what teams are good and what teams are not. So it's tough.
And that's where when there's an absence of data, you do have to go off of the subjective perspective of the humans involved. And that's where I don't know, sometimes bad data is better than no data, and that's kind of how I see it with like US handball. Obviously you'd want it to be perfect and you want it to be better, but that's where there are certain things you just can't even do anything with right now. So
what would you recommend to the teams listening for us to improve our level of stat keeping? I mean, even beyond the basic level of filling out a score sheet, is there certain tactics or efforts that should be put forth to try to gather as much data as we can? Because right now, as you've probably seen from the few games you came and watched with us, it's just a stat sheet that just keeps track of goals and penalty, like if they had 2 minutes or something like that.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it.
I think that's fine at this point. I think that's where you got to start with the basics first. I'd rather have solid goals, shot attempts by player, make miss, and their penalties, and how many minutes they played in the game. I'd rather have that stuff first versus then focusing on shot location and that stuff. Honestly, like having a video recording of the whole game helps, because then people can go back and retroactively do it if there's interest. And then just having like a legitimate schedule with the final score somewhere also helps. You talk about like wanting to rank the teams, having the final scores of the games in every game they played. And then any of the little notable things, like did they play a full 60 minutes? Did they not? If not, how much that was? Stuff like that would certainly help. But that's where like don't outkick your coverage or whatever, I guess. Like just excel at whatever extent you think you can actually do, and you can actually do for a whole season. Like that's where I notice this with all sorts of grassroots sports, not just like handball in certain aspects, but I notice a lot of times where their season kicks off or their tournament starts, they've got a great website and they've got a schedule out there and everything. And then once the games are played, they never update it, or they update it for the first weekend and then they're done. So I would rather just have whatever the commitment. I'd rather, whatever it requires you to have a commitment for the full season. I'd rather just have you do whatever you could do to that extent.
Gotcha. Yeah. Keep the bar low, but keep it going. The
But
bar has
but
to
past the bar.
Right.
Yeah, keep the bar low so you can actually jump over it.
Exactly. A lot of good points there. A lot of stuff in the chat right now. So, Mishi, as far as why Brian's not publishing it, I'm not sure if you're talking about just going to the. I mean, it's on the. He's got the whole spreadsheet on the website there. So you and I might be thinking of two separate things, but I can send me a note after this, and I'll send you and Neil both the full-on spreadsheet that he's got. Mishi also said, Neil, that you should go to the IHF website. That's where you can download all the game stat sheets from past championships. So I think you and I started working on that.
I see that, and yeah, that is the one place that's done well. I think even the Premier League in Europe is also on that level, but that's about it. That's where, like, I guess real quick, just like for basketball, the way professional basketball is across the world, every country's like top league, they have good box score stats and play-by-play stats across the board, and that's where I don't, you see that for IHF and for like the Premier League for handball. It seems like that's kind of mostly it. So.
Unless it's Champions League, don't want.
Sorry, Premier League, Champions League. My bad.
Creme de la creme. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Mishi wants to know if you would have any interest in doing data analysis for the national beach teams. They qualify for World Championships more often than the indoor teams, so it's definitely might be a nice opportunity for you to work with them as well. Beach is a very wild game, and I think offers just as many opportunities for in-game improvements, I think.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm open to handball of all kinds. I'm open to the women's side. I'm open to beach. So I guess that's where for me to kind of do any like worthwhile analysis, it's more a matter of getting the data generated. So getting it done well, done consistently across the board. And that's where like I'm open to helping with that to some degree too. But that's where it would just be nice if these leagues had things a little bit better up and running in general. And that's where like even like on the IHF website, it's there and it's in there as a PDF, but that's like the PDF's the only way to kind of get the full view of like every player in every statistical column that there is sometimes. Sometimes it's kind of a little bit more hidden. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm open to doing beach handball stuff as well, especially if we're good in that.
Yeah. We actually have been pretty good as of late. And they're advocating to put beach in the 2024 Olympics in Paris. So that might be another avenue for us to pursue. But Mishi, reach out to Neil. His Twitter is beneath his face. It's just at Neil M. Johnson. What else we got here in the chat? There's a lot of talk about the stats table not doing their jobs. Having worked with almost entirely just college players, when they work the stats table, they're on their phone, they're eating a sandwich, they forget that the game, who scored that? Oh, they don't have numbers. I don't know. Let's just give this guy a goal. It drives me nuts. Like, we're asking for 45 minutes, hour of your time. You're already committed to handball for the whole weekend. Like, it's not that big of an ask, I think, for you to pay attention to this game. It's very tough for me because we all have to help each other because we're such a niche and very grassroots sport that everybody needs to understand that even though we hate people on the court or we're very competitive on the court, off the court we got to do whatever we can to boost all efforts. So whether that's cheering for another team, doing the stats as effectively as possible, we just need to help legitimize ourselves. And I think that's what you said about the other websites and other sports is that there's a schedule.
Exactly.
There's actually data and information that seems organized. So
it's a way to legitimize the sport and the specific team or league that you're in. When people go to the website and see that it was actually updated after the event was over and that the stats are there. Obviously, like that's where so to like the I guess the I don't know what you would call them, but the stat keeper's bias, I guess. Yeah, the stat keeper's bias is always going to be there. And there are certainly ways to actually control for that if you have enough data. But obviously, yeah, that's where like I tell people sometimes it's better. Like I'd almost rather you not register a stat than register a stat that you know is most likely wrong.
Good to know. Good to know.
Like if for your for your college kids doing the stats table, and I think I've even said this a couple of times. I was able to go in games before things shut down. Was like I'd rather you mark that like an unknown goal was scored. I don't know who it was, but it was that side did attempt one and or score one.
Yeah.
And that's where like you stream the games, you record them, and it's like, well, if we were to then care about the stat sheet for that game and then do analysis on it, someone could at least then go back and try to find it. So that's where I talk about having like a video of the whole match. That really helps too.
One of the comments in the chat is that stats are definitely useful when money is on the line. So the gambling folks definitely like to take note of the stats to help in whatever way they can to help predict the outcome of the game. So that definitely plays a factor.
Yeah, gambling and analytics are very similar in a lot of ways. There's different objectives at hand. Creating odds, your goal is to try to get the money on both sides 50-50, but you still use a quantitative approach to get there. And then on the analytics side, it's more of like just trying to help your team win or just trying to help your broadcast, do a better broadcast or whatever. So, but yeah, that's where, like, honestly, for the World Championships coming up, let me know, anyone, if you see gambling lines specifically on the game level for it, because I can then do implied win probability odds off of that, and they might have more data at their ready to generate that than I do in 2 months. So that's something that can be useful and can be a useful tool for Team USA.
Good to know. I know John Ryan, I think Bet MGM is where he's been finding a lot of the Champions League matches he's been trying to gamble on.
Okay, I took like a quick look, I think even today, but that's where it might be too far out for stuff to get posted other than just winning the whole event.
Yeah, rosters haven't even been announced.
Yeah,
yet, so
definitely.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Let's get to the mailbag of questions from John, since he could not be here live to watch and comment in the chat. He had quite a few, and I just took notes on some of them. But first one is, are there any kind of next-gen stats with handball that you see? We talked about some of them, but
yeah, definitely. So I guess one that's pretty standard across the board for a lot of sports is some sort of like expected goals measure. A lot of people understand that for soccer or football, but there's definitely those for hockey and for basketball. I've specifically generated that for basketball myself using player tracking data. So yeah, that's where like that in theory gives you the most granular analysis you could on a shot. So like you could basically, given all sorts of parameter, generate what is the likelihood of that shot going in. Understanding the location or where the shot attempt, where the thrower is, understanding where the defense is around them, whether or not they're in the way or not, and then understanding where the positioning of the goalie is. Obviously, if you were able to have all of those things and have enough data on that, you could apply some pretty basic machine learning algorithms on top of that to then create a model to project that for future shots. And then that's where, like, for a team's perspective, you could then do that to understand what shots you shoot best and what shots aren't really worth attempting anymore. So then you could kind of cater your strategy around putting yourself in the best position to maximize, your shooting percentage. And then obviously all this can be done and vice versa for your defensive approach as well.
True. It's definitely, goalies I think would be very interested about things like that. I mean, me personally, I know I try to think in the middle of the game when I'm getting shots, if I got a guy that I'm keeping track in my head where he shot previous attempts, and typically if the
Okay.
guy's shooting the same spot, he's going to come back that same spot again. And I know that's my big tactic with 7 meter shots is that I don't know what it is, but at least at the U.S. level, it's where it's very low level capabilities and knowledge of the game. If you're a right-handed shooter taking a 7, typically um, they'll typically go to my left, so they're right. And so if I save that first shot and they take another 7, then they just alternate to the other side. And I know that
Yeah.
they know that. I know that they don't know that I know that. So then I save that, and then now I'm in their head, and so then it gets fun. So
Yeah,
things
I
like
mean
that.
that's where goalies I think are so much are extreme. Obviously, they're extremely important in handball, but that's where like in soccer or football, the goal is just so much bigger, and the shot attempts are typically just so much further away.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they talk about for their penalty kicks that like there's a like there's been analytics research done to show that there is like a perfect shot. A perfect shot is where it's like if you hit it in a specific location at a certain speed, the goalie physically can't get there in time. But that's where with handball, that's obviously not going to be the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where like another thing I was thinking about is like I guess I played basketball and baseball growing up, but I was a pitcher in baseball, and something that apparently was a strength of mine was my release point. Apparently, it was hard to see my pitches coming at people. So that's where like I wasn't necessarily a fast thrower relative to other people, but the positioning of my arm and where my arm was behind my body on my release made it harder for people to see the ball to then understand where it's going, how fast it is, if it's a changeup or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be another thing to, if you could quantify that for a goalie's perspective, to be like these types of players hide their shot better. These types of players typically shoot at this angle. Those are things that you could all impute into an expected goals model as well. To so, like, I mean, if I was training players, I would obviously want them to try to hide their shot as much as possible. Someone mentioned lefties in the chat. Like that would be another thing too. Is if I could have as many lefties on my team as I could, that would be the strength too. Because people typically just don't, or aren't used to that. You're used to having maybe one guy on the court doing that, but if everyone's doing that, that's going to kind of really change things. So those are all things that are very important. Another thing, I guess, real quick on just shots that I think would be worth exploring is hitting it off of the ground more.
Yeah, the bounce shot.
Throwing it like basically at their feet or a little bit in front of it, because
Just
that's where
yep.
a little bit in front of it so that it won't hit their feet. But like that's where if you have a high release point and then you have it going basically down right in front of them, I think that would, I mean, what would you think? Would that be kind of really increase your having to react to it versus understanding, like, increase your reaction time versus decreasing it?
So there's a couple factors in play with the bounce shot. So one being sometimes if you're playing a game that they're playing with a lot of stickum, that bounce shot and the stickum could be a factor where it affects your shot. It may not come out as quickly. It might give the goalie more time to get in front of it. I know domestically, I try to tell people to do bounce shots more frequently, and you want to bounce it probably about 1.5 feet away from the goalie, because they're going to step and they're going to bring their arm down with them. So you want to get it above their leg but below their arm, and hope that you get the ball bounces between them before the arm reaches the leg, before they can kind of close that wall. So with stickum, it'd be a little bit interesting to see. I don't see too many professionals doing bounce shots. I don't know if that's just I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know I try to tell my guys to do a lot more bounce shots. I know in lacrosse, when I played lacrosse goalie, that was a lot of people's bread and butter is bounce shots, because if you're playing on grass, you get a nice hit a weird patch of dirt, and then the goalie.
It's just another variable that the goalie then has to account for.
Right. Just like in baseball, fielding an infield ball, same kind of thing. So, a lot of factors there with the bounce shot. you're talking about having like a high release to, that point to maybe get a higher bounce to. I don't know that you'd want that, because then their arm wouldn't have to move as far. You want that bounce to be low to try to get just over their leg and make their arm have to basically come all the way down.
You're right with that the bounce matters, but I was talking about more of like if you're throwing from like above your head and then it's actually bouncing to the floor. That's where for a goal your eye level has to change. So like that's the max your eye level could change on any shot. So that might throw them off. But yeah, obviously if you're throwing it like a straight down, the bounce isn't going to be good enough, right? So there is like a balance there. So like I was watching some highlights the other day of guys throwing basically around the hip of the defender. Just everything you can. Everything you can do to obfuscate the release. That has to just be crucial.
Mm-hmm. Good. Another question from John is what kind of analysis can we do on WAR for handball, the wins above replacement?
Yes, that's where like eventually we want to get to a point where you can understand individuals' contributions on the court, because once you understand that, then you can start to understand what is your best lineup.
No, Neil, don't go. Apologize, folks, for our connection problems as usual. Wouldn't expect anything else here. Okay, Neil's back.
I'm back?
Yep, sorry.
But yeah, so wins above replacement, that's definitely a player level stat. There's definitely a couple you could do, like plus minus ones or other ones. But yes, it would be great to have understanding of a player's level of contribution to a team, trying to parse that out, on how many goals you score and assist on. Those would be game changers, honestly.
Yeah, big. We already talked about 7v6. One of the points he brought up is how we can probably work on measuring like a defensive player's effectiveness. That's one of those stats that just doesn't really. You can't. How do you say that this middle defender is doing a great job of preventing shots or preventing opportunities when there aren't any actual shot blocks that he performs?
Yeah, so that's where having context can help, and that's where like a wins above replacement number can try to capture that in some way. So knowing what position a player is and knowing when they were on the court, and knowing how many goals they gave up versus they scored, that can kind of capture that in an indirect way. Defensive actions across all sports is tough to measure because there aren't that many countable stats for that as there is for scoring, and they're honestly not as important as scoring is. So yeah, that's where like understanding when you're on the court, when you're off the court, what position you were on when you were on the court.
Oh boy, folks, we are falling apart here. I don't know. I turned off Roomba. We don't have any other problems on that front, so trying to figure out why. It's got to be OBS. If anybody's got a solution as to why OBS is eating up our bandwidth here, obviously streaming is slowing that down. But Neil, you're back. Sorry.
What did you last hear from me?
You said defense is not as important as just keeping track of the scoring. That's where there's not as many defensive stats.
Well, no, it's harder to understand defenses, and part of that is because there's not as many countable stats on defenses as there is on offense. But that's where, like, if you had a WAR stat or you had a plus minus stat, you can at least capture, like, hey.
This is comically bad, folks. If we had a WAR stat.
Try to attribute a decent approximation of defensive contribution. But I mean, honestly, like, just in the scheme of things, goalie's got to be like 90% off the top of my head of just on an abstract level of like how much how important is each player on the court. It's like the goalie's got to be 90%, and then everybody else is only like 10%. Just it's like something like that, you know?
Yeah. I like that. I think goalies are important. Which and honestly, in handball, if you have a guy that's playing
hot goalie,
yeah, I mean, just like in hockey, I mean, you can ride that guy through the playoffs, and he's just in the zone. And you have those games where you're just like, I might have a complete shutout this half. You know, obviously in America, that's a lot easier than in Europe and things like that. But it's like, I don't know. I'm just doing really well. And at the same time, you know, your defense there's a fundamental thing that is not taught in America just because the skill level of handball and knowledge is not quite there yet. But, you know, when you're playing Europe, the defenders are blocking the far post so that the goalie only has to focus on the near post. That's their whole job. So it's a team effort to block every single shot. So the defense helps make the goalie look better. And helps the goalie have more confidence to make more saves. So I think that's a big factor that, again, would be something that we could try to capture. Because blocks are very, you know, we can track that no problem. But
well, and then that's where, like, if you have like an expected goals number for your opponent, and you can understand with good detail what type of shots they have great success with, the ones they don't. That's where you could try to push them into taking shots that they aren't good at. Obviously, if they know they aren't good at it, they'll fight back some. But that's where, like, the nature of how offense and defense works in handball. It's like if for instance they only score on like 25% of their wing shots, it's like, well, how about we just let their wing guys be wide open and let them have at it?
Right.
And that's where, like, you want to control for the fact that they're now shooting an open shot or something. So you don't want to make sure their open shots are now 50% or something. But that's where, like, if you kind of are just standing in specific spots or not standing in specific spots, they might just be like, okay, we'll take that. We'll take what the defense is giving us. But that's where, like, in my head, I'm like, just put everybody in front and center and form a wall. Like, obviously it's not that simple, but, like, effectively you kind of want to do that to some degree.
Well, that's like in the middle of the game. It's like, this is no secret to anybody out there. I hate wing shots. If the wing gets the ball, it's gonna go in. That's a
that's where block. For certain goalies it's different,
right?
And, like, we talked about wing shots being ineffective, like in a vacuum or something. But if you have a guy who has a great vertical and they can basically get a corner shot off, an effective corner shot off by jumping from the wing, that's really going to change it. Yeah. So, like, there are factors there that need to be considered, and that's where, like, yes, you don't necessarily want any, like, if an open shot has a success rate of like 66% across the board, then you almost never want to let one of those up. But that's something you need to know before you make that decision.
Yep. Having a tough time reconnecting to Twitch, but we'll continue on with the John mailbag questions here. He wants to know a little bit more about how we can properly analyze shooting percentages. You know, his point was that, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, is that let's say you got a guy that is lights out from, 10 meters, but he doesn't shoot that frequently, or you got a guy that shoots all the time from 9, or different variables like that. Like, do we take the easier, closer shot that we're just getting more shots off at, or do we take the shot we know we're going to make, but it's from further away and we're not as confident it's going to go in, even though the numbers say that it's more likely, and things like that?
Well, that's where you want to rely on the numbers a little bit more than what it sounds like you're saying. And that's where you can do math to understand at what point you're going to get diminishing returns. Obviously, like, if you're just going to shoot the exact same shot every time, the effectiveness of the first shot's going to be way better than all of the subsequent shots. So having a steady diet that mixes it up to some degree is important, but so you can kind of look at it from both ways depending on what effectiveness your team has. One way is, like, let's just, like, pretty much certain shots are off the table. Certain shots are, 20% is what we're getting at them. Don't shoot those at all. The other way to look at it is if you're getting something where you're getting like 80 to 90% in the half court or whatever, that's probably like what is the average like shooting percentage? Like 50 or 55?
Oh, for a team?
Yeah, just on a very broad level.
Oh, broad. Yeah, that's probably safe. You know, a good team is probably 70s, I'd say.
Okay. So yeah, that's where like if you had a shot, basically if you had a shot that was coming in and you're making like 90% of the time, you should probably hammer that until it's no longer 90%.
Yeah.
If you have shots that are at the 70% level, you should do that almost all of the time. And I mean that's where when there's not a shot clock, you could keep cycling through the formation and attempting it until the defense finally lets up and gives you the opening that gives you what you need. I mean, that's where sadly you like it with the nature of where handball is right now, you could focus on execution to that level to where you're just doing the exact same thing every time and waiting until the defense relents versus them just having to do their job for X seconds. And then you kind of have to throw something up if you aren't able to execute it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Makes sense to me. That's why I tell the OSU guys, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or if it ain't broke, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So,
yeah.
Another question that John has is, what kind of capabilities do you think we can track with the impact of surrounding players? Like, let's say we have a really good left back. How well do we track his impact on the left wing and the left wing's ability to get better opportunities, and vice versa? If we have a really good left wing, does that create more opportunities for the left back and things like that?
Yeah, so that's where like war and plus minus stuff, there's correlation between the players on the court. So that's where you like if you had one of those models and you had enough data, you could see the effect of putting a certain teammate on or off the court for one specific player. And then on top of that, you could do analysis generalized to each position. And you might be able to glean something out of that as well. But that's where formations can potentially vary.
Oh. Different formations make different impacts. Let's hope we get Neil back here soon. I don't know what's going on with Twitch. Can't. Seems like we're disconnected. We're still recording. We're still streaming. Everything's still live. Your last words were different impacts.
Just that, yeah, being able to understand one position and one specific player's impact on another player at another position would certainly be something you could do with war or plus minus model. Some of that stuff, like I can tell John's thought about the game a lot. A lot of this stuff is a little holy grail-y, where like I don't know how achievable it actually is or the perfect version of it is, but it is 100% the right thinking you want to go down, because that's where like for the work I do in basketball, like we're at a point now with our NBA model. We created a new version of it that's going to be coming out soon, where you can kind of plug and play the players and see their interactions and see how much that affects the games and affects the season. When you have as granular data as we do with basketball and the NBA with the player tracking data, you can do that responsibly and get meaningful results out of it. So that's something that's very powerful. Like we can evaluate trades, we can evaluate the impacts of injuries, and those are just awesome to have, right?
So. Yeah. Good. Well, that was all questions John has at this moment. I'm sure he will be sending you a whole slew of comments and questions tomorrow when he gets to listen to this. For whatever reason, I can't reconnect to our Twitch feed, which means that we don't have any more comments from our viewers. And we've covered all the topics I had. Neil, do you have any other items that you wanted to discuss on tonight's show?
Not really. Just that we talked about all sorts of stuff here, and definitely open to people reaching out to me. My DMs are open on Twitter. There, it takes a village in a lot of ways. You certainly understand that.
Oh,
So
yes.
that's where for applying analytics to handball and trying to do whatever I can to help Team USA. I can't do it all on my own either, obviously. So if people have done, if people have done work already, if people have even just kept stats and stuff, having historical stuff helps generating models immensely. So that if they're aware of research that is out there, forward it my way, and yeah, let's just keep the discussion going, seeing what we can get out of it.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, Neil, thanks for coming on the show, and I hope that a lot of folks reach out to you. For those of you who don't know, Neil's Twitter is beneath his head down there. It's at Neil M. Johnson again. But yeah, thanks again, Neil, and we hope to have you on again soon. Maybe Joey will be back. You never know. I'm sure he's got a whole slew of questions, so cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Of course. As always, everybody, keep shooting, shooters. Here's a picture of Neil at the Sports Center desk. So he spent some time up there in Bristol. And like I said, at Neil M. Johnson. I'm only going to say it 300 more times. So make sure to go give him a follow. Reach out to him with any questions you might have. And we'll go from there. So cool. Neil, give me 30 more seconds here so I can close down the show. 3, 2, 1, goodbye.